Hey there everybody, welcome back to the channel. So today we're continuing our series of the Phyrexia All Will Be One set review, and today is part 3. We'll be covering red as we delve into the furnace layer for the sphere of Phyrexia. And so let's just go ahead and just jump right into it and get started. We're going to start with the commons, and our first card is going to be Axiom Engraver. It's for 1 and a red. It's a creature, Phyrexian Wizard. 1/3 power and toughness. Axiom Engraver enters the battlefield with 2 oil counters on it. You can tap it and remove an oil counter from Axiom Engraver to discard a card and then draw a card. So it's kind of it's got the rummaging ability that red employs quite a bit throughout the years. But in order to use it this time, you have to remove an oil counter. Not bad. It's kind of a basic card in a sense, but I think having the oil counters could pay off for other abilities and other spells that you might have if you're playing those for limited and possibly constructed. Just depends on how viable a constructed oil counter deck is. But I think this card has some basic utility use, but you might end up actually using it more for its oil counters for other purposes. That being said, I think I'm going to go ahead and just give it a low rating for limited. And then for constructed, I'll do the same. It's pretty much similar to any other 1/3 you would see for a 2 mana drop that lets you rummage. But I think beyond that, it's not much different other than just the oil counters. So kind of limited in use, but might have some upside for employing the oil counters. So we'll just go ahead and leave it at low for limited and constructed. Our next common is Barbed Batterfist for 1 and a red. It's an artifact equipment, and it says for Mirrodin! Exclamation mark. And this is the first time we've seen the for Mirrodin mechanic. And that says, when this equipment enters the battlefield, create a 2/2 red rebel creature token, then attach this to it. And the equipped creature gets +1/-1, and the equip cost is 1. I think we're going to see a lot of these for Mirrodin mechanics for the equipment, and some of them are pretty decent. This one's, I would say, is kind of mid-range-ish, I guess. Comes into play with as a 2/2 red rebel creature token, and it gets a +2/-1, so it's actually a 3/1 for 2. Not bad. It's makes it a little fragile. I think because of that, I'll probably give it a low rating for limited. Same for constructed. It might have some upside to it though, with since it's an artifact, and that other spells and abilities require the use of artifacts, so that might be an upside for it. But I think for now, we'll just give it a low rating for limited and constructed. Our next common is Bladegraft Aspirant for 2 and a red. It's a creature, Phyrexian Warrior, 2/3 power and toughness with menace. Equipment spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. That's a good thing. Activated abilities of equipment you control that target Bladegraft Aspirant cost 1 less to activate. That one's actually pretty good, and it seems like there's quite a bit more equipment in this set than in others. And so it's definitely a sub-theme there that looks like it might be viable in the limited format. I think because of that, and because it discounts the cost of equipment spells, but also reduces the equip cost by 1, that might be pretty decent. Might let you get your equipment a lot sooner. So I'm going to give it a mid rating for limited. I think that's a decent rating for it. It's something that you wouldn't mind using for an equipment focused deck. I think for constructed, I'll give it low. Just unless you're playing a commander deck where you have a lot of heavy equipment count, this could actually come in pretty handy. But overall, in a standard deck or a pioneer deck, I don't think it's going to see much play, unless it's very specialized for equipment spells. So I think we'll go mid for limited and low for constructed. Next up is his card, Blazing Crescendo for 1 and a red. It's an instant. target creature gets +3/+1 until end of turn, and it also says exile the top card of your library until the end of your next turn. You may play that card. I actually like this card. It's a combat trick that also gets you a card that you can utilize from exile until your next turn. So you can play it on your turn and attack, maybe use the combat trick, and then get access to that exiled card. And you have all the way till your next turn to play it. Or I'm sorry, till the end of your next turn to play it. And that could even be done on your opponent's turn. And then you still have access to that card all the way to the end of your next turn. So any of those red cards that let you exile the card and lets you have the option of playing it until the end of your next turn, I always like that. The longer you have to play that exiled card, the better. And it's kind of neat how they put it on a combat trick this time. I haven't seen that before. I think it's a card that will definitely see some use in Limited and possibly in Constructed too. I'm gonna give it a mid rating across the board for it. I think it has some upside for what it does. Pretty cool card design, how they kind of mesh those two card designs together. It's pretty cool. So we'll go mid across the board for Limited and Constructed. Our next common is Chimney Rabble for 3 and a red. It's a creature, Phyrexian Goblin Warrior. 3/3 power and toughness. It has haste, and when Chimney Rabble enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin creature token. I think this is a pretty decent card for what it does. For its rate of 4 mana value, you get a 3/3 hasty creature, and also you get a 1/1 red Goblin creature token. So it's actually a combined 4/4 power and toughness, which is not bad. This could have some good surprise value too, like in your limited games when your opponents are trying to decide what to do with you, and they might think they can attack for the win, and you're able to block and hold them off, and then on the crackback you can surprise them with this and deliver lethal damage. So I think it's a pretty decent common for what it does. The fact that it has haste and it also gives you another body to possibly block with or attack with, I think I'll give it a mid rating for Limited. For Constructed, there are other cards at the 4 mana slot that are better, but this might fit in a Goblin deck, or a Commander deck or something like that. But overall, I think it'd probably see lesser play in Constructed than Limited, but I like it for Limited for sure. Moving on to the next card is Forge Hammer Centurion for 2 and a red. It's a creature, Phyrexian Warrior, 3/2 power and toughness. Whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put an oil counter on Forge Hammer Centurion. Whenever Forge Hammer Centurion attacks, you may remove 2 oil counters from it. When you do, target creature can't block this turn. So it gets an oil counter based on the death triggers for other creatures and artifacts you control. Not bad. And then you can remove the oil counters to keep 2 oil counters to keep things from blocking. I like that. Not bad. I'm starting to see a possible limited deck build for these oil decks that rely on death triggers, and oil counters could be pretty decent for that. I'm going to actually kind of give it a mid rating. I like it. I think it has the potential to open up a lot of possibilities with creatures clogging up the ground. If you need something to get through and keep it from blocking by removing oil counters, and this is a good way to do it. Plus, if you have other creatures that die, it just gets more oil counters, and that'll always help. So I think mid is probably pretty good for Limited for that. Constructed, I'm going to go low on that. I don't see it being used in constructed formats that often, unless you're playing some kind of deck that makes it where creatures are hard to block. This might work, but I think it's going to shine mostly in limited format. So we'll go mid and low for Forge Hammer Centurion. Next one is Free from Flesh for 1 red. It's an instant. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Put 2 oil counters on it. It's pretty good. That's kind of neat too. It's usually, sometimes with these red instant combat tricks, they require you to have your creature be attacking. This one actually just gives it a +2/+2 straight up and lets it get 2 oil counters. I think that's pretty decent. The fact that you get oil counters from it too could be pretty decent, pretty handy. I think because of that, I'm going to give it a. I think I'll give it a low rating. However, it's pretty close to that line between low and mid. It's the 2 oil counters is what really has the upside swing for that. And I think as we get into the playing the format, we're going to find that oil counters continue to be a big part of how the limited format plays out. Same thing for constructed. We'll just go ahead and go low. There are better combat tricks to use for red, for 1 red mana, other removal spells. So I think it will stay at low for constructed. Our next red common is Furnace Strider for 4 and a red. It's a creature Phyrexian beast, 4/5 power and toughness. Furnace Strider enters the battlefield with 2 oil counters on it. So we're starting to see a theme here. A lot of things are getting oil counters, and you can remove an oil counter from Furnace Strider. Target creature you control gains haste until end of turn. Interesting. So this is, you could actually have this card enter the battlefield, remove an oil counter from it, and it has haste right away. You can also do that with any other creature that comes into play, remove an oil counter, and give that haste as well. I like it. I think it could be a good top end card for your mana curve. And from what I've seen, this is one of the larger creatures I've seen. Because of the nature of it, I think I'm going to give it a mid rating for limited. I think it's pretty solid. The fact that you can give itself or something else haste with by removing 2 oil counters, and it looks like there's possibly going to be ways to give your creatures oil counters as well. So this could be a continuous benefit for this card. I think we'll see it shine in limited in that sense. For constructed, still the same thing. Just kind of loses out to things that cost the same mana, but can do a little bit more and affect the battlefield more. But this is pretty decent though for limited. So I think we'll go mid, limited, and low for constructed for the Furnace Strider. Moving on to Hazardous Blast for a 3 and a red. It's a sorcery. Hazardous Blast deals 1 damage to each creature your opponents control. Creatures your opponents control can't block this turn. Yeah, it's pretty good. It's an expensive answer to all the mites and creature tokens that you might see. This is good sideboard tech for that. For its mana cost, though, I don't see it being used that much beyond that. You might have 1 in your deck if you know your opponents are playing a lot of creatures and clog up the ground. You might be able to use this to keep them from blocking and then attack with an Alpha Strike or something like that. So, but beyond that, I think it has a focused use, and that's about it. Something you'd probably bring in from the sideboard. So I'll give it a low rating for limited and constructed. I think that's what it would be best served as, is something that comes in from the sideboard. Our next card is Hexgold Slash for 1 red. It's an instant. Hexgold Slash deals 2 damage to target creature. If that creature has Toxic, Hexgold Slash deals 4 damage to that creature instead. Yeah, I think this is a card that will probably see some play for sure. There's a lot of toxic creatures out there, and I think it's something that could be used main deck or even coming in from the sideboard if you're playing in a paper limited format. In best of 1, you probably want to main deck this. I'm going to give it a mid rating. It's kind of on that line between low and mid, but I think it just has enough. It deals just enough damage to the creature to put it at the mid rating. And it's of course going to shine the most when your opponents have toxic creatures. So I think it's a decent removal. I'm going to give it a low rating though for constructed. There are other one mana red spells that provide the same effect and do a little bit more by letting you target planeswalkers or damage to your opponents as well as the creatures. So I think mid and low for Hexgold Slash. Our next card is Kuldotha Cackler for 2 and a red. It's a creature, Phyrexian Hyena, 2/3 power and toughness with trample. Whenever Kuldotha Cackler attacks, it gets +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is the number of permanents you control with oil counters on them. So yeah, we're definitely seeing the necessity for having oil counters and how it can benefit you in other ways than just having them. The fact that this gets +X/+0 when it attacks equal to the number of permanents you control with oil counters, that's pretty good. Similar to the modified mechanic from Kamigawa, Neon Dynasty, where some of your creatures would get bonuses based on the number of modified creatures you control. I think that's pretty good. I think this is going to have some good strength in limited, and I think I wouldn't mind having this in the main deck in a limited deck. I'm going to give it a mid rating. I think it could get pretty out of hand if it goes unchecked. Your opponents are going to have to worry about this, plus any of your creatures that have oil counters. For constructed, unless you're playing a heavy oil counter deck, maybe with Proliferate or something like that, I don't see it being used that much. Decent body for limited, but I think for constructed, it probably won't see much play. So we'll go low for that. Our next common card is Molten Rebuke for 4 and a red. It's a sorcery. Choose one or both. Molten Rebuke deals 5 damage to target creature or planeswalker, or destroy target equipment. It's one of these 5 damage sorcery spells that we've been seeing in last several years in the sets at the common slot. I think this is probably something you bring in from your sideboard to take out an equipment card or a pesky large size creature your opponents have, or a planeswalker, since it deals damage to that too. But because it's a sorcery and it's a 5 mana value, I don't see it being used much beyond bringing in from the sideboard, or maybe just having one main deck to take out one of your opponent's big threats. So we'll go low for limited, and same thing, low for constructed. They're just better removal spells in constructed to choose from. Our next card is Sawblade Scamp for 1 red. It's a creature, Phyrexian beast, 1/1 power and toughness with haste. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on Sawblade Scamp. And you can tap it and remove an oil counter from Sawblade Scamp. It deals 1 damage to each opponent. Yeah, these oil counter red creatures are pretty cool. We're definitely seeing a strong deck type that could be built in limited play for red. And the fact that it gets an oil counter anytime you cast a non-creature spell, that's good to know. That might go well with blue, possibly, or white, or black even, and maybe playing a mid-range style deck that has a lot of non-creature spells that is focused around oil. And it deals a point of damage to each opponent. I think, though, it doesn't come into play with an oil counter, so that's kind of a bummer. So initially off the bat, if it's just a 1/1 with haste, not bad. That means you could attack with it right away early on. I'm going to give it a low rating, but it's a high-end low rating. I think if you're in a dedicated oil deck, it'd be worthy of a mid-range rate on it. Low for constructed, but the more focus you can get with your deck having oil counters and non-creature spells, the better this card's going to be. And you can just, once you have a lot of those, you can just sit back and ping him for a point of turn, and might be the difference in the game, and be able to finish him off with this card. So, but we'll go low for limited and low for constructed. Our next card is Shrapnel Slinger for 1 and a red. It's an artifact creature, Phyrexian beast, 2/2 power and toughness. When Shrapnel Slinger enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a creature. When you do, destroy target artifact an opponent controls. That's pretty cool. There are some annoying artifacts in this set, and maybe if you're playing white-red or a deck that lets you use a lot of tokens, when this comes into play, you can just sack one of those tokens and destroy an artifact. And their artifact could be a creature, so this is something you could use against them too as well. I think it definitely has some pretty decent uses. I think in this format, I think I want to stick with low though. It is 2/2 creature that could be killed, but it's definitely something that it's right on that line. If you're facing an opponent with heavy artifacts, this is going to be an MVP. But beyond that, outside of that, it's just going to be a 2/2 body, and that will outlive its usefulness after a certain point in the game. So probably low for limited. Same thing for constructed. This is a card that I'd have in the sideboard that you would bring in to take out some of your opponent's stuff. But beyond that, I wouldn't main deck it. So I think we'll go low for limited, low for constructed. Our next card is Thrill of Possibility. So this is a reprint from several other sets. I think it first appeared in Throne of Eldraine, but for 1 and a red, it's an instant. As additional cost to cast a spell, discard a card, and draw 2 cards. Love the artwork for it. It's fantastic. This card's pretty solid. I'm going to give it a mid rating for both limited and constructed. This is a card I would main deck. It definitely comes in helpful early, mid, and late game if you need to get some good cards in your hand and ditch some of those useless lands that are in your hand or something, or a card that might be better suited in your graveyard to get the most out of that. So I love seeing this, that it's reprinted. So I'll go mid across the board for this card. Next card is Volt Charge for 2 and a red. It's an instant. Volt Charge deals 3 damage to any target, and then you proliferate. That's pretty good. Pretty good removal spell. This is a reprint, I believe, from New Phyrexia. And the fact that you can proliferate lets you proliferate your oil counters, so that's kind of nice. And if your opponent's got poison counters on them, you can make them get another one of those. So that's pretty good. That'll help with the corrupt mechanic. I think because of the nature of the way some of the limited deck types are shaping up to be, limited archetypes for Phyrexia All Will Be One, I'm going to give this a mid rating, just due to the fact that it helps you proliferate and it deals 3 damage to any target. So that means you can do damage to your opponents, planeswalkers, aside from creatures. Constructed, I think I'll probably go low. There are other spells that are pretty decent. Unless you're playing a proliferate deck, then this is a little bit better, but I think for now, overall, I'd probably give it a low rating. And our next common is Volshock Splitter for 3 and a red. It's an artifact equipment. It says for Mirrodin. So you get a 2/2 rebel creature token, and this is becomes into play attached to it. Equipped creature gets +2/+0, and it has an equip cost of 2 and a red. I think this is a little expensive for what you get out of it. Basically for 4 mana, you get a 4/2 creature, and then to equip it again, it costs 2 and a red. I think that's a little pricey, so compared to other equipment. So I think I'll give it a low rating, unless you have that creature that gives it reduces your equipment spell costs and equip costs. I don't see this being used for much unless you're playing maybe a dedicated artifact or equipment deck. But even then, because of the priciness for what it does, the trade-off is just not there. Constructed, same thing. Give it a low rating. I don't think it'll see much play in Constructed. Okay, so moving on to the uncommons now. Our first card is Awaken the Sleeper for 3 and a red. It's a sorcery. Gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature. It gains haste until end of turn. If it's equipped, you may destroy all equipment attached to that creature. So it's one of these active treason style cards. I'm not a real big fan of how these cards have become a little bit more expensive as of late. They used to be 2 and a red, and they might have 1 minor ability that goes with the gain and control effect, but it seems like they've upped the mana cost on them, or I'm sorry, the mana value on them a little bit, and the return's not as good as it probably should be for that mana value. Because of that, I think this is more of maybe a sideboard card to combat some of your opponent's equipment and get rid of that, and can control one of their creatures and do as you will with it. Because of that, I think I'll just go ahead and give it a low rating for limited, and same for constructed. I think it probably do okay in Commander. Don't see it getting much play in any of the other constructed formats, but I think it could be useful in Commander. And limited, same thing. If you're playing a best of 3, it could come in out of the sideboard. Maybe as a finisher in a best of 1, you might have it in the main deck just to attack your opponent with one of their creatures to throw off their calculation for lethal damage. But aside from that, I don't see it getting much regular use. So I think we'll go low for limited and constructed. Our next card is Cacophony Scamp for 1 red. It's a creature, Phyrexian Goblin Warrior, 1/1 power and toughness. When Cacophony Scamp deals combat damage to a player, you may sacrifice it if you do proliferate. When Cacophony Scamp dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. Let's see here. This card could be pretty powerful. Could also end up just being a 1/1. Well, let's see here. It ends up actually kind of being like a devil token. Those devil tokens from Innistrad that when they die, they deal a point of damage. So it's actually a little better than I thought here. So yeah, gonna end up killing 2 power creature or 2 toughness creatures, and you can sack it to proliferate. That's kind of cool. If you got a lot of counters and a lot of things with counters, your opponents that you want to increase their poison counters, or if you want to improve your counter standing, this could actually be pretty good. So I think I'm going to give it a mid rating for limited, and I think I'll do the same thing for constructed. I think this could have some pretty good use. The fact that it's like a devil token in a sense, when it dies, that's pretty good. And then if you're able to boost its power in any way when it dies, that's even better. You can have it deal direct damage to your opponents, planeswalkers, or one of their bigger creatures. So, plus you get a proliferate trigger off of it when it dies. So not bad, actually, a little bit better than what I thought here. So mid rating across the board for it. Our next uncommon is Churning Reservoir. For 1 red, it's an artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, put an oil counter on another target non-token artifact or creature you control. Then you can pay 2 and tap it. Create a 1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin creature token. Activate only if an oil counter was removed from a permanent you controlled this turn, or a permanent with an oil counter on it was put into a graveyard this turn. So activate only if an oil counter was removed from a permanent you control this turn, or a permanent with an oil counter on it was put into a graveyard this turn. So if permanent with the oil counter was put into a graveyard, could be yours or your opponent, or yours or your opponent's, could allow you to use that trigger. I do like the fact that it lets you put oil counters at the beginning of your upkeep on a target artifact or creature. That could help you boost your oil strategy. And for some oil counters, those can make a pretty big impact. I think this is kind of a sneaky good card. I'm going to give it a mid rating for limited, and I think same thing for constructed. I think it could end up being a pretty good utility card that could help boost some of the strategies you have that revolve around oil for constructed. So let's go mid across the board for Churning Reservoir. Next card is Exuberant Fuseling. For 1 red, it's a creature of Phyrexian Goblin Warrior, 0/1 power and toughness. Does have trample. Exuberant Fueling gets +1/+0 for each oil counter on it. When Exuberant Fuseling enters the battlefield, and whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put an oil counter on Exuberant Fuseling. So yeah, this just plays right into the oil counter strategy, and with that last artifact, Churning Reservoir, it can help make this creature pretty big too. I do like it. I think it's pretty solid. Could make for some fast games if you have a ton of 1-drops and a ton of these. I'll give it a mid rating for limited, and I think it could find its place for constructed. The fact that it deals with a creature or artifact put in the graveyard, you can get an oil counter out of it. So that could go really nicely in a sacrifice deck. So I think we'll continue to go with what we've done the last 2 cards and make it 3 in a row for mid rating for both limited and constructed. Our next card is Furnace Punisher. For 2 in a red, it's a creature, Phyrexian Warrior, 3/3 power and toughness. It has menace, and it says at the beginning of each player's upkeep, Furnace Punisher deals 2 damage to that player unless they control 2 or more basic lands. So this is actually a non-basic land Punisher, and in current standard, I could see this getting some pretty good use, either brought in from the sideboard or main decking, depending on the meta. But in limited, probably, they're probably going to have basic lands more often. So, I mean, there are non-basics that they will use, but most often they'll probably have at least 2 basic lands. So I think I'll give it a low rating for limited. However, I'll give it a mid rating as a good utility card that punishes your opponents for playing non-basics in constructed. I think it's kind of solid there in that sense. And in a mono red deck, that could put them on the clock pretty fast. It looks like some of these red cards are definitely aggro, definitely fast. So this could play into that strategy. Our next card is Gleeful Demotion. For 1 red, it's a sorcery. You can destroy target artifact, and if you control that artifact, create 3 1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin creature tokens. I actually think this card's pretty good. its base purpose is to destroy an artifact that could be yours or one of your opponents. So that's a sorcery speed smelt, but still that's decent for 1 mana. However, let's say you got some mites on the battlefield, and those are artifact creatures, you could just use this to destroy 1 mite and you end up getting 3 Phyrexian goblin creature tokens that can block while the mites can't. Now you're trading off a toxic creature for 3 token creatures, but still you're expanding your board for just one red mana. And because of that, I like it. I'm going to give it a high rating for limited, and I think I'll do the same thing for constructed. I think this card is going to see some use. There's a lot of artifacts running around in limited and constructed, and I think this is just only going to benefit from all the targets that are running around in the format. So we'll go high rating, limited and constructed, for Gleeful Demolition. Next card is Hexgold Halberd for 1 and a red. It's an artifact equipment, and it says for Mirrodin. And it says, as long as it's your turn, the equipped creature has first strike and trample, and the equip cost is 2 and a red. I don't like the fact that it relies on it being your turn in order to have first strike and trample. That kind of stinks. Otherwise, it's just an equipment on your 2/2 token creature. I think because of that, it is an equipment that's good, but I think overall, because it doesn't do much else, I'm just going to give it a low rating. It does give you a 2 body for 2 mana, but I think for now, low is where I feel that it probably is. There might be some other options for it. However, well, let me think here. You can just cast it for 2, and you just get a 2/2 body. You know what? I think I'm going to revise this a little bit. I think I'm going to go mid for it, for limited. After reading it, at the very worst, it's a 2/2 red creature, and then when you attack, it has first strike and trample. So, and you can equip it onto something else. So, I think my first impressions of it were incorrect, and we'll give it a mid rating for limited. However, for constructed, there are better options at the 2 mana value slot, so we'll keep it at low. So that's what it'll be for Hexgold Halberd. Next card is Magmatic Sprinter for 2 and a red. It's a creature, Phyrexian warrior, 3/2 power and toughness with haste. And when Magmatic Sprinter enters the battlefield, put 2 oil counters on target artifact or creature you control. Wow, that's pretty good. And at the beginning of your end step, return Magmatic Sprinter to its owner's hand unless you remove 2 oil counters from it. So this will keep going back to your hand unless you remove 2 oil counters that are on it. But if you never put oil counters on it, it's always going back to your hand, and you always can recast it to put 2 oil counters on a creature or artifact. And it has haste. I like this card. I think this is going to actually be a pretty awesome card to use in limited that revolve around the oil counters. And same thing for constructed. I'll give it a high rating in limited, and I'll give it a mid rating for constructed. It could be a high rating in constructed, possibly. It just depends on how much of an impact oil counters are going to make in constructed. But for limited, I definitely see it making an impact and finding ways to boost your team by giving them more oil counters. Just letting that Phyrexian oil infect everything. So we'll just go high for limited, mid for constructed for the Magmatic Sprinter. Next uncommon is Nahiri's Sacrifice for 1 and a red. It's a sorcery. As additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice an artifact or creature with mana value X. Nahiri's Sacrifice deals X damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures. Not bad, pretty good. You could actually, here is a good sack outlet if you were able to use that Act of Treason card and get one of your opponent's creatures, and that has a decent mana value, and then you could sacrifice it to this spell and have it deal X damage to among any number of target creatures. Not bad. It can be pretty good. I think this is the only downside is you do have to sacrifice an artifact or creature in order to get a value for X. But I think there's enough out there that you're going to have when you build your deck. You'll keep this in mind and find a way to make it have an impact for you. So I'll go mid as a good form of removal. And same thing with constructed. I could see this maybe a copy of this getting put in a constructed deck. Definitely a commander deck. Because it can take out multiple targets, so that's pretty decent. So yeah, we'll go mid-limited, mid-constructed. Next card is Ozida Finisher for 5 and 2 red. Creature Rebel, Ogre Rebel, 7/5 power and toughness with affinity for equipment, and it has trample. So if you're playing the equipment deck in limited, this could actually be pretty good. And the fact that it's big and tramply, and not to mention it will cost less if you have a bunch of equipment, and that equipment could possibly boost its power and toughness. This appears to be one of the payoffs for playing the equipment deck, so I think that's pretty decent. I'm going to go ahead and overall, I think it's a mid, but if you're playing a dedicated equipment deck, this would be a high as a solid payoff. For constructed, I'll go low on that for constructed, but if you're playing, like I said, an affinity deck, an equipment deck, that would be a payoff in constructed for it. Might be worthy of a mid rating. So, mid for limited, low for constructed, but if you're doing a build around equipment deck, then high for limited, mid for constructed. Next up is Rebel Salvo for 2 and a red. It's an instant, affinity for equipment, so another affinity for equipment payoff. Rebel Salvo deals 5 damage to target creature or planeswalker. That permanent loses indestructible until end of turn. Not bad. That's pretty good. So if you have a bunch of equipment, this will only cost you 1 red. Other than that, it'll be a 3 mana spell for dealing 5 damage to a creature or planeswalker, and that they'll lose indestructible. So this could actually kill something like Gideon if you're playing in like a Pioneer or Modern, or take out some other indestructible creature that your opponents might have. So I like it. It's a good utility card. I think I'll give it a mid rating for limited, and same thing for constructed. I could see this being brought in from the sideboard, or maybe having at least 1 copy in the main deck. It's a good answer though for creatures with large toughness as well. It kills Shield Dread as well if you're playing it in standard, and you don't have to worry about it. So that's pretty decent, and looks like it can kill quite a few planeswalkers with 5 damage. So we'll go mid across the board with this for Rebel Salvo. Next up is Resistance Skywarden for 3 and 2 red. Ogre Rebel. It's a creature, Ogre Rebel, 5/5 power and toughness for menace and reach. Yeah, this just looks like just an old-fashioned beat stick for 5 mana. It's a good return, 5/5 for 5 menace and reach, so it's gonna be hard to block. I'll give it a solid mid rating for limited. For constructed, probably go low on constructed. There are other things you can use at 5 mana. But could make an impact maybe in Commander, once again, since Commander is a little bit more forgiving as far as the number of cards you can choose to put in your deck. But I think it's going to be a solid card in limited. I'd be happy to get it for sure. It's almost, in my opinion, maybe worthy of a high rating, but maybe I've had an additional ability. But for now, I think mid is a solid for it for limited. Next card is Urabrask's Anointer for 3 and a red. It's an artifact creature, Phyrexian Wizard, 4/2 power and toughness. And when Urabrask's Anointer enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to any target, where X is the number of permanents you control with oil counters on them. So yeah, another payoff for playing oil counters in red. This essentially becomes a Flame Tongue Kavu, but it can deal damage to any target based on the number of oil counters are on permanents you control. So pretty solid. Give it a mid rating for limited, and I think I'll do the same thing for constructed. I think it's worthy of that. Just got to be playing the oil counter decks with it, and you'll get a good payoff for it. So we'll go mid across the board for both formats. Okay, so now we're moving on to the rares. And our first rare is Dragonwing Glider for 3 and 2 red. It's an artifact equipment. It says 4 Mirrodin. So it enters the battlefield. You create a 2/2 red rebel creature token, and then attach this equipment to it. And the equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has flying and haste, and has an equip cost of 3 and 2 red. I think this is a pretty solid card. I think it's bomb worthy, actually. Pretty close to it. The fact that it basically makes that 2/2 red rebel creature token a 4/4 flying and haste. So most times you're going to be able to hit your opponent right away for 4 damage. And I think this could get pretty nasty if it goes unchecked. Not to mention, you'll be able to use it on any of your other creatures you have that it might be bigger if your initial token dies. So I really like it. Not quite epic rating, but I think it's worthy of a high rating for limited. I think it's really solid. And for constructed, kind of on the border here between mid and high. I think I'm going to go high with it. I think it's just good enough to be worthy of a high rating for constructed. Wouldn't mind trying it out, giving it a shot. I think it'll really shine in commander though. You get your throw this on your commander, just fly over, smack your opponent for a lot, and they take commander damage, or even if you have a toxic creature or something like that, make him take a poison counter. So I think it's a really solid equipment card. It's probably one of the best ones I've seen for the set. So we'll go high across the board for limited and constructed for the Dragonwing Glider. Our next rare is, I believe this is our first Planeswalker we've seen in the set. Koth, Fire of Resistance for 2 and 2 red. Legendary Planeswalker Koth. You can +2 loyalty to have it search your library for a basic mountain card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Or you can -3 loyalty. Koth, Fire of Resistance deals damage to target creature equal to the number of mountains you control. That's pretty good. Really good in mono red. Or you can -7 and you get an emblem with whenever a mountain enters the battlefield under your control, this emblem deals 4 damage to any target. Yeah, that's pretty solid. I think I'm going to go. Yeah, that's pretty decent. You'd be able to use his -3 ability right away. Take out a creature if you have a, 3 or 4 mountains, and then plus it lets you go get more mountains, making each time you deal damage with him bigger and bigger. Really solid. I think I'm going to go high rating for both limited and constructed for Koth. Not quite epic yet, but pretty darn close. But definitely a solid high rating across the board for both formats. Koth is a pretty good card. Our next rare is Red Sun's Twilight for X and 2 red. It's a sorcery. You can destroy up to X target artifacts. If X is 5 or more, for each artifact destroyed this way, create a token that's a copy of it. Those tokens gain haste, exile them in the beginning of the next end step. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's a good answer card for a bunch of artifacts. They'd probably have to be artifact creatures to get the full value out of if you cast it for 5 or more, and making tokens of those artifact creatures and then being able to attack with them. Then you exile them at the beginning of the next end step. It's too bad there's no death trigger on them. That would really help the sacrifice style decks. I think I'm going to go mid for limited, and same thing for constructed. Unless you're playing against an opponent that's got a lot of artifacts. This is probably something you'd probably bring in from the sideboard, but I think for now I'd probably go mid for Red Sun's Twilight for both formats. Next card is Slowbad, Iron Goblin for 2 and a red. It's a legendary creature, Phyrexian Goblin Artificer, 3/3 power and toughness. You can tap him to sacrifice an artifact, add an amount of red equal to the sacrificed artifact's mana value. Spend this mana only to cast artifact spells or activate abilities of artifacts. Yeah, he's pretty good. He's seems to be best fitted for an artifact focused deck, artifact tribal. Could be pretty decent for ramping into some larger artifacts. I think I'll probably go mid for limited, just because I'm not sure how many artifacts you're going to get to be able to utilize his ability that much. And unfortunately, you won't be able to add any mana if you sacrifice artifact tokens because they don't have a mana value. And for constructed, I'll go mid as well. I think it's a good utility card, but overall, it's not something that you're going to see used quite a bit, unless it's part of some kind of specific engine. Then that's when it really will really shine and might be worthy of a higher rating. But overall, I'll probably just go mid for it for Slowbad Iron Golem or Iron Goblin. Our next rare is Urabrask's Forge for 2 and a red. It's an artifact. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put an oil counter on Urabrask's Forge, then create an X1 red Phyrexian Horror creature token with Trample and Haste, where X is the number of oil counters on Urabrask's Forge. Sacrifice that token at the beginning of the next end step. So that's pretty good. Those tokens essentially will get bigger and bigger because each combat you're putting another oil counter on the Forge, and it has a trample. Basically, you're making ball lightnings that are trampoline and hasty that can deal X damage. And then you also get the death trigger off of it if you're using a sacrifice deck. So that can be pretty decent. I like it. I'm going to give it a high rating for limited, and for constructed, I think it's worthy of a high rating. I think this will really shine in a commander deck. Could find some good use in a constructed deck like standard or pioneer or modern. 3 mana, so it's not overly expensive, but it's not super cheap either. So it's kind of a mid-range type card, but I think you could probably find some pretty good use for it. So we'll go high for limited and constructed. Our next rare is Vindictive Flamestoker for 1 red. It's a creature, Phyrexian Wizard, 1/2 power and toughness. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on Vindictive Flamestoker, and you can pay 6 in a red and sacrifice Vindictive Flamestoker to discard your hand, then draw 4 cards. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each oil counter on a Vindictive Flamestoker. So this is actually would go really well in a prowess deck or a spells deck or some kind of mid-range deck where you have a lot of non-creature spells. The more non-creature spells, the better. And the fact that it lets you draw 4 cards, it's pretty decent. That's going to be a little harder to pull off in limited. So I'll probably give it a mid rating in limited. But for constructed, I like it. I'll give it a high rating. I think it's pretty solid. I think deck builders are going to be able to find some pretty creative brews to get the most use out of this card. And especially in Commander, the more cards you can use to cast that are non-creature spells, the more oil counters this will get, and the cheaper the activated ability will be. So they'll go mid and then high for Vindictive Flamestoker. Next up, we're moving into the Mythic rares. All Will Be One for a 3 and 2 red. It's an enchantment. Whenever you put one or more counters on a permanent or player, All Will Be One deals that much damage to target opponent. Creature an opponent controls or planeswalker an opponent controls. Yeah, this card's crazy. You saw how many oil counters red is pushing into the format, and this is the epic payoff for it. I like it for limited, epic, and same thing for constructed. In fact, I think it could be even more broken in constructed. But if you're able to get a oil counter focused deck, or even a toxic poison style deck as well, this card can be a big payoff, and you can just start pinging your opponent for a ton of damage, or a creature or a planeswalker. You'll do pretty well with it. So we'll go epic rating for All Will Be One. It's a solid card. I can't wait to see what people come up with this. Our next mythic is Capricious Hellraiser for 3 and 3 red. It's a creature, Phyrexian Dragon, 4/4 power and toughness. The spell costs 3 less to cast if you have 9 or more cards in your graveyard. Interesting. Flying, and then when Capricious Hellraiser enters the battlefield, exile 3 cards at random from your graveyard. Choose a non-creature, non-land card from among them and copy it. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. Not bad. Pretty good. It could be a 3/3, or I'm sorry, a 4/4 flying for just 3 red if you've got 9 cards in your graveyard. Plus, you get to cast a non-creature spell without paying its mana cost. That could be pretty good. I think we'll give it a mid rating for limited, and for constructed, let's see here. I think it's right on the line between mid and high. I'm going to give it a high rating for constructed. I think players will be able to find a good use for it, and especially in these spells decks or not, where you have quite a few of those non-creature spells to use. Who knows, maybe even some kind of planeswalker focused deck. So it can be pretty good. So yeah, I think we'll go mid and high for limited and constructed for Capricious Hellraiser. Our next card is Solphim Mayhem Dominus, and I believe this is the first in a series or a cycle of Dominus cards that we'll see for the set. It's a 2 and 2 red, legendary creature, Phyrexian Horror, 5/4 power and toughness. If a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals double that damage to that player or permanent instead. Then you can pay 1 colorless and 2 Phyrexian red mana and discard 2 cards, and you can put an indestructible counter on Sulfum, Mayhem, Dominus. That's pretty solid. So you could use pay 2 life, and actually I should read the rules for that since I haven't covered it yet in this video. Phyrexian mana can be paid with either red or 2 life. So you could pay 2 life and 1 colorless to activate that second ability. The fact that when it would deal when a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent or a permanent they control, it deals double that damage. That's pretty solid. That could go really well with that all will be one enchantment that you have. So I like this cycle of the Dominus cards, and I think for this one it could get pretty nasty. So I think I'm going to go Epic on limited, and same thing for constructed. I think you're going to get some pretty good use out of this card, and the fact that it'll get a indestructible counter, that's pretty decent. The only thing is it does have to survive that indestructible ability. Our indestructible ability has to resolve, and that way they can't use a removal spell on it. So you have to have that resolved in order for it to stick. So, but it's a pretty good card, pretty solid, and I think it could be a big problem for your opponents. So we'll go Epic across the board for Sulfum, Mayhem, Dominus. So that is it for the red cards. As you can see, red really is pushing the oil counter strategy. A little bit of poison counter, and it has some proliferate as well. It has some pretty powerful spells that complement the oil strategy. So I think it'll be exciting to see how that plays out. Pretty aggressive too, with some of the decks you could probably build. I'm excited to see how red goes with some of the other colors, to see if they kind of build off that oil strategy. So we'll find out. But that's it for the red cards. As we delve deeper into the spheres of Phyrexia, we're going to go from the Furnace Layer to the Hunter's Maze next. So green will be next. So that'll be fun. So I think that'll do it for this video. If you did like the video and you want to catch the next one, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. You'll get notifications when I post a new video. And if you like it, hit that like button. That always helps me out. And leave a comment if you like. I always like talking with people that watch the videos and stuff. Always up for that. But until the next video, I think that'll do it for this one. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Take care.